My name is Karen Montgomery. I am 67 years old. For more than 3 decades, I owned a small flower shop on King Street in Charleston. Flowers were my way of speaking when words failed me. After my husband passed away, the shop became my anchor, my proof that beauty could survive grief. I raised my 2 children there. Their homework spread across the counter while I arranged lilies and roses. My life has always been quiet, ordinary, and built on sacrifice. But nothing could have prepared me for the day I opened my son's briefcase. It was late afternoon. The shop had been sold the year before, but I still kept the back office as a place to drink tea and keep my papers. Andrew, my son, had left his leather briefcase on the chair. At first, I only meant to tidy up. My hand brushed against the cool brass clasp. Something in me whispered, "Open it." Inside the folders and contracts, a single sheet of paper slid into my lap. The words were written in Andrew's precise handwriting. "If she hesitates, transfer without consent." For a moment, the room tilted. My breathing slowed as though the air had thickened. That phrase, so cold, so calculated, was not meant for a stranger. It was written about me. My son, the child I once carried through storms of illness, the boy whose hand clung to mine on his first day of school, had put into writing a plan to erase me from my own estate. $16 million, every acre of land, every share my husband and I had worked for, would be shifted beyond my reach. $16 million. To the world, it sounds like power, like fortune. To me, it was simply the sum of my life's endurance. The land where my children learned to walk. The investments my husband and I planned in long winter nights, calculating every dollar. The flower shop that bloomed against the odds. None of it had ever felt like wealth. It was memory, safety, sacrifice turned into soil and stone. And there it was, reduced to a number on a page, and a command to cut me out. My hand trembled, but not from age. It was from betrayal. A wave of nausea rose, yet I did not cry out. I did not call Andrew. I placed the paper flat on the desk and sat in silence. I remember the taste of the tea that had cooled beside me, faintly bitter, like ash. The porcelain cup had a crack running along its side. I traced it with my finger as though to remind myself I was still whole. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not despair. A clarity, sharp as glass. If he believed my silence meant weakness, he had forgotten who raised him. I had lived my entire life in the shadows of other people's needs. I knew how to bend without breaking. I folded the paper and slid it back into the folder exactly where I had found it. My footsteps were steady as I carried the cup to the sink. On the surface, nothing had changed. But in truth, everything had. You may expect that I confronted him that evening, demanded answers, shouted, accusations. I did none of that, because shouting only feeds those who already stopped listening. I chose something stronger. I chose silence. Inside my heart, a quiet vow formed. If my son wanted to erase me with ink and signatures, then I would answer him not with rage, but with patience and law. A silent strategy. That day, in the stillness of my kitchen, I realized this truth. The loudest defense a mother can ever have is not her voice. It is her endurance, her memory, and her refusal to vanish. So, I began my plan. When I sat there holding that cruel note from Andrew's briefcase, my mind did what it always does in moments of pain. It drifted backward. Memories came in waves, uninvited, carrying me to places where the air smelled of roses and carnations, where life felt fragile but still full of promise. I was 23 when I first opened Montgomery Blooms, a narrow storefront with peeling paint and a crooked sign. My husband David stood by me that day. He had carpenter's hands, calloused and steady, and he promised he would build me shelves strong enough to hold whatever dreams I tried to stack on them. We had nothing more than a modest loan and the determination to prove ourselves. While other couples our age were buying bigger houses, we lived in a small duplex near the river, saving every penny to invest in that shop. It was never about becoming rich. Flowers are not gold or oil. They fade quickly, but in their brief lives, they hold meaning. Condolences, congratulations, forgiveness, love. I like to think that arranging them was my way of arranging the broken moments of other people's lives. When Andrew was born, I carried his bassinet into the shop and set it behind the counter. Customers bent down to coo at him while I tied ribbons and wrapped stems. He grew up breathing in the scent of chrysanthemums and baby's breath. I remember him tugging at my apron and asking if roses could really feel pain when you cut them. He had such tender eyes, such endless questions. David worked nights for the city, repairing power lines, while I kept the shop open from dawn until dusk. There were winters when the heating bill threatened to swallow us whole. I can still see myself taking off my wedding ring, sliding it across the pawnshop counter, and telling myself it was temporary. "It is just a thing," I whispered. "My boy's education will be worth more." That money went into Andrew's college savings account. People often told me I spoiled him. Perhaps I did. He was my firstborn, the son I had prayed for after 3 miscarriages. I wanted him to feel a safety I never knew as a child. My own parents lived hard, bitter lives, and I grew up believing that love was something you had to earn by staying quiet and useful. I swore my children would never feel that kind of hunger. Sarah, my daughter, came 6 years later, a gentle soul with her father's patience. She, too, helped in the shop, dusting shelves and humming while she arranged daisies in crooked little cups. But the attention always tilted toward Andrew. He was the one who carried the Montgomery name. He was the one we poured our resources into. When Sarah asked for piano lessons, we hesitated. When Andrew asked for debate camp, we signed the check without blinking. David died when Andrew was 19, a fall from the power lines, sudden and merciless. I remember standing in the hospital corridor, clutching David's tool belt, feeling the leather dig into my palms. In that instant, the entire weight of the family shifted onto me. Andrew was already in college, and Sarah was just 13. I told myself I could not afford to collapse. So I stood tall at the funeral, thanked every neighbor who came with casseroles, and returned to the shop the next morning. The shop became more than a business. It was proof that we would endure. I worked double hours. Sarah helped after school. Andrew came home during breaks, head full of new ideas and ambition. I noticed the way he looked at the shop, though, half with fondness, half with embarrassment. He spoke of corporate law, investment firms, mergers. "Mom, you don't understand how money really works," he told me once, brushing past me as though my years of sacrifice were quaint relics. Still, I loved him fiercely. When tuition bills arrived, I paid them, even if it meant skipping meals. I sold the pawn ticket for my ring to cover his final semester. When he graduated, I stood in the bleachers with Sarah, my throat burning with pride, certain that David was watching from somewhere. Andrew hugged me tightly that day, whispered, "I'll make you proud, Mom." I clung to those words like scripture. Now, Decades later, sitting in that quiet kitchen with his betrayal written on paper, those memories cut deeper than the present. Because they told me who I had been, the mother who gave everything, who carried her family through storms, who believed love was enough to protect her. I realized then that Andrew's scheme was not born overnight. It was built slowly, on foundations I had laid myself. Every sacrifice I made for him, every time I chose his needs over Sarah's, every time I told myself he must be protected at any cost, it all led here, to a son who believed his mother's silence was permission. The ache in my chest was not only betrayal, it was recognition. I had raised him to believe he could reach for anything. I just never imagined he would reach for my very existence. The clock ticked on the wall. My tea had grown cold. I placed my hand over the crack in the porcelain cup, the same way I had covered cracks in our lives for years. I whispered to myself, "Karen, you have been here before. You know how to survive what others think will break you." That memory of the past, both tender and heavy, became my armor. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would rise the only way I knew how, quietly, steadily, like the flowers that bloom even in broken soil. After that night with the note in my trembling hands, I started to see things differently. It was as though a curtain had been pulled back, and every detail of Andrew's behavior carried a new, unsettling weight. What once looked like the busy life of an ambitious attorney now appeared as something sharper, secretive, and dangerous. He had always been meticulous, but lately he moved with a kind of urgency that felt out of place. He would leave the house before dawn, claiming early court appearances, though the local newspaper's docket told a different story. Sometimes he would return late, smelling faintly of cigars, his suit pressed too perfectly, his smile too rehearsed. I began to notice how carefully he guarded his briefcase, carrying it even into the kitchen when he poured his evening coffee. That briefcase, the one that had already betrayed him once, became a symbol of a distance I could no longer deny. I remember one morning in particular. Sarah had come by to help me restock the shop. She noticed the way Andrew brushed past her, phone pressed tightly to his ear, muttering words like transfer, amendment, and signature. Sarah frowned, glancing at me as if to ask what was going on. I shook my head, silent. I could not burden her yet. She had carried enough disappointment from my favoritism in the past. Until I had proof solid enough to stand on its own, I would not make her shoulder the suspicion. Inside, though, my heart rattled like a loose window in a storm. Each overheard fragment, beneficiary, consent, overseas account, landed like another stone in my chest. I began keeping a small notebook tucked into the pocket of my apron. At first, it was just words, scraps of overheard conversations, times and dates. But as the days passed, those scraps formed patterns. I was not imagining shadows. The betrayal had structure, like a building under construction, floor by floor. Andrew must have thought my silence meant blindness. Perhaps he believed his mother was too old to notice details, too tired to ask questions. He underestimated me. I had survived lean winters, unpaid bills, the grief of burying my husband. Silence had never been weakness for me. It was survival. And now it became my shield. The first real test of that silence came at breakfast, one Saturday. Andrew sat across from me, buttering his toast with deliberate calm. He looked up casually and said, "Mom, you should think about selling the flower shop. It's not profitable anymore, and holding on to it doesn't make sense." I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl like clouds in a storm. "That shop carries our family's name," I said softly. "It isn't just about profit." He smiled, but the smile held no warmth. "Sometimes sentiment costs more than it's worth." The words hung in the air like smoke. I said nothing more, and in that silence, I felt the balance of power shift. He expected me to argue, to defend myself. Instead, I withdrew into quiet. It unnerved him. I saw it in the flicker of impatience across his face. That was when I knew silence was my weapon, not my weakness. A few days later, I found an envelope addressed to Andrew from a law office in Atlanta. There was no reason for him to be corresponding there. His practice was firmly rooted in Charleston. I did not open it. I could not cross that line yet, but I memorized the firm's name and wrote it down in my notebook. That night, I locked the notebook in the wooden box where I kept David's old letters, the silver necklace glinting faintly against my collarbone as I turned the key. The signs multiplied, whispers behind closed doors, documents hurriedly tucked away. Late-night calls cut short when I entered the room. Each detail felt like another betrayal, but also another confirmation that my instincts were right. My son, the boy I once rocked to sleep in a shop filled with flowers, was building a plan to erase me. There were moments when I almost confronted him, times when his eyes darted toward mine, cold and unfamiliar, and I longed to shout, "I know what you are doing." But instinct told me that if I revealed my hand too soon, I would lose every chance of defending myself. He was already calculating, already preparing. If I moved rashly, I would become exactly what he wanted me to be: powerless. So I stayed quiet. I listened. I recorded. And with every silent observation, I felt my strength return. I was no longer a mother waiting to be cut out of her own life. I was a witness, gathering evidence, thread by thread. One evening, as I locked the shop after a long day, I caught my reflection in the glass door. My face looked older than I remembered, lines etched deep by years of sacrifice. But in my eyes, I saw something I had almost forgotten: resolve. David once told me that flowers bend in the wind, but do not break. That night, staring at myself in the fading light, I whispered, "I will not break." The signs of betrayal had become undeniable, and though they cut me deeply, they also carved out the space where my plan would grow. A plan of silence, patience, and timing. A plan that would one day leave Andrew trembling. Nights became the hardest part. During the day, I could busy myself with the shop, with customers and ribbons, and the smell of fresh lilies. But when the sun went down and the quiet settled in, the house grew heavy with secrets. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak in the floorboards, wondering if Andrew was pacing in his room, drafting the next step of my erasure. There were moments when I questioned my own mind. Maybe I had misread that note. Maybe Andrew had some other explanation. A mother's heart can be stubborn, always searching for innocence, even when guilt is plain. But then I remembered his cold smile at breakfast, his guarded briefcase, the envelope from Atlanta. The doubt twisted inside me, colliding with the memories of the boy who once asked if roses felt pain. How could the same child grow into a man capable of cutting out his own mother? I felt caught between two worlds: the past, where my sacrifices were rooted in love, and the present, where those sacrifices seemed to have bred entitlement instead of gratitude. My heart ached for David, who might have steadied me with his gentle voice. He always had a way of cutting through confusion with simple truths. Without him, I carried both the burden of suspicion and the burden of silence alone. Sometimes I would sit at the kitchen table in the dark, the silver necklace cold against my skin, and whisper to myself like a prayer, "Karen, do not falter." That necklace had become more than jewelry. It was a reminder of promises once whispered in softer years. It anchored me when my thoughts threatened to unravel. I thought often of Sarah, too. Her face lingered in my mind, full of warmth that had cooled over the years. She had drifted from me, believing I favored Andrew, that I placed more trust in him than in her. The truth was more complicated. I had feared the estate would crush her gentle spirit, and so I protected her from its weight. But in protecting her, I also distanced her. Now I wondered if she would even believe me if I told her what I had discovered. Or would she see it as another attempt to elevate Andrew's importance? The conflict tore at me. Should I reveal the truth to Sarah, risk her disbelief, and burden her with this betrayal? Or should I remain silent, guarding her innocence until I had undeniable proof? Each choice felt like a wound waiting to open. In those sleepless nights, my mind rehearsed conversations that never happened. I pictured myself walking into Andrew's room, placing the note on his desk, and demanding an explanation. I imagined him laughing, telling me I misunderstood, or worse, staring at me with that cold impatience, confirming every fear. My chest tightened at the thought. If I confronted him too soon, I might lose not only the estate, but also the last fragile thread connecting us as mother and son. There is a particular kind of loneliness in carrying knowledge you cannot share. It hollowed me from the inside. I longed to hear someone else say, "I see it too. You are not imagining this." Yet I kept silent, convincing myself that silence was strategy. My silence was not surrender. It was the stillness of a bowstring pulled back, waiting for the right moment. I began writing more in my notebook, not just the facts and scraps of evidence, but the voice I could not use aloud. I wrote letters to David, as though he might read them somehow. I confessed my fears, my anger, my disappointment, and my love. Writing became my release, the only place where I could scream without sound. Still, the turmoil inside me built like pressure beneath glass. Every time Andrew looked at me with that detached smile, I felt the urge to break it, to shatter the fragile pretense between us. Yet something deeper kept me still. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was wisdom earned through years of endurance. Life had taught me that storms reveal themselves in time. If I rushed, I risked becoming the very thing he painted me to be, an old woman losing her grasp on reality. One night, I brewed a pot of chamomile tea and sat in the living room surrounded by photographs. Andrew as a boy holding seashells from the beach, Sarah painting at the shop's counter, David smiling with his arm around me, both of us younger, unlined by grief. I studied those pictures and felt the tears press at my eyes. Betrayal is never just about the present. It reaches backward, staining the memories that once sustained you. That was the deepest cut of all. As dawn crept through the curtains, I realized something. This turmoil, this ache of betrayal and silence, was also shaping me. It was teaching me patience sharper than any weapon. It was forcing me to confront not only Andrew's choices, but my own past decisions that had led here. Pain was becoming clarity. I whispered into the morning light, "I will not let you erase me." And for the first time, those words did not feel like a plea. They felt like a vow. There came a point when the silence inside me grew too heavy to carry alone. I needed a place to set it down, if only for a moment. That was when I called Helen. Helen Parker had been my neighbor for more than 30 years. We had raised our children side by side, traded recipes, shared the same church pew on Sundays. Her life had not been easy either. Her husband abandoned her in the middle of a mortgage crisis, and later, her son tricked her into signing over the deed to her house. By the time she discovered the truth, it was gone. She now lived in a small apartment near the bus stop, carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd lost everything and survived anyway. When Helen answered the phone, her voice sounded surprised. "Karen, it's been too long." I hesitated. "Would you like some tea? I could use the company." She arrived that evening with a loaf of bread, wrapped in a paper bag. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our cups, the crack in my porcelain teacup catching her eye. She touched it gently. "Still holding on to this old thing?" "It's cracked, but it still serves," I said. My voice wavered more than I wanted. Helen studied me in that way only an old friend can, seeing through layers of polite smiles to the truth underneath. "What's wrong, Karen?" For a long while, I didn't answer. I watched the steam curl between us, listened to the ticking clock. Finally, I reached into the wooden box and pulled out my notebook. I slid it across the table. "Read the last few pages." Her brow furrowed as she turned the entries. Dates, overheard fragments, the note I had copied word for word. I watched her eyes darken as she absorbed each detail. When she finally looked up, she shook, her head slowly. "Oh, Karen, I wish I could say I didn't know this pain, but I do." The room felt heavier, but also strangely lighter. Someone else had seen it. Someone else carried the knowledge now. Helen's hand covered mine. "You remember when my boy convinced me to sign those papers? How I told myself he loved me, that he would never betray me. I ignored the signs until it was too late. Don't make my mistake." Her words pierced me, not with judgment, but with truth. "I don't want to believe it," I whispered. "He is my son. I carried him. I built his future." "Love doesn't mean blindness," she said firmly. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for our children is to hold them accountable." I sat back, feeling the weight of her experience pressing against my own turmoil. Helen was not just sympathizing. She was reflecting my life back at me, showing me the path that awaited if I stayed paralyzed by denial. Her story was a mirror, and in it, I saw myself teetering on the same edge. "I don't want to destroy him," I confessed. "I only want to protect what David and I built." Helen's expression softened. "Then don't destroy him. Protect yourself. Protect what's yours. If Andrew chooses to fall, let it be by his own doing, not by your silence." We sat there for hours, sipping tea, breaking bread, speaking of the past. At one point, she laughed softly, remembering how our children once played hide and seek in the garden, their laughter ringing out like bells. The memory stung, but it also reminded me that betrayal doesn't erase the moments that were real. Those joys still belonged to me, even if Andrew had changed. As she left, Helen pressed my hand. "Promise me you won't wait until the ground is gone beneath your feet." "I promise," I said, though my voice was quiet. After she was gone, I lingered at the doorway, staring into the night. The stars were faint, scattered like seeds across a dark field. I thought of David's words from years ago. "Karen, you are stronger than you know." For the first time in weeks, I believed him, Helen's visit did not erase the pain, but it did something just as important. It reminded me that silence could be chosen, not imposed, that I could wield it with intention, not as a prison, but as a shield. Her story became my warning. Her strength became my reflection. I closed the door, returned to the kitchen, and washed the cracked teacup. As the warm water ran over my hands, I whispered, "I will not wait until it is too late." And in that quiet moment, a new resolve began to take root. Helen's warning would not leave me. It echoed through the house like the tick of the kitchen clock. Steady, undeniable. At dawn, I set the kettle on low. Andrew's door was closed. Water hissed behind the shower wall. Love and fear rose, then settled as I walked to the dining room where his briefcase waited on a chair. The brass clasp was warm, under my thumb. I opened the case with the care I used to cradle lilies, slow, precise. Folders lined the interior. Between two of them lay a slim envelope labeled Drafts. I slid it free and unfolded the top page. Power of Attorney, the heading read. Beneath it, my full legal name. There were blanks for banks, transfers, sweeping authority no honest child should seek. And there, in faint graphite, hovered a ghost of my signature. Not ink, not mine, but an outline waiting to be traced. The room tilted. I kept reading. The next page carried a notary acknowledgement with a woman's name I did not know, and a future date already typed. The third page was worse. Translucent paper with my signature printed beneath, in bold font. A guide for training a hand to follow every curve. He was not just planning, he was rehearsing me. The shower shut off. Water dripped through the pipes like a countdown. I returned the pages to their order, replacing every crease. Then lifted my phone and took 3 photographs in quick succession, wide, detail, and close. The flash was off. My hands were steady. I knew this ritual from the shop. Inventory, label, store. In the back room, I fed the pages through the copier we kept after selling the shop. The machine woke with a groan. The green bar swept across the paper with a sound like a held breath. I dated each copy at the bottom right with a black pen. Initials, time, location. It felt ceremonial. Andrew's footsteps moved down the hall. I set the originals back and angled the case exactly as I had found it. In the kitchen, I poured tea and stirred honey with a soft clink. He entered, tie loosened, eyes guarded. "Up early?" he said. "Couldn't sleep," I answered. "Chamomile helps." He nodded and left. After the door closed, I carried the copies to my bedroom. On the dresser sat David's wooden box, carved with small roses, after Andrew was born. The lid still held the cedar smell of his hands. I opened it and felt something settle in me, the way earth settles around a planted root. Inside were our tax returns, a few letters, and the pawn stub from the year I sold my ring to pay tuition. I slipped the copies into a large envelope. On the flap, I wrote, "For safekeeping." I slid the envelope beneath the stack and closed the lid. The roses caught the light. Shadows deepened their petals. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the tremor pass. I did not hate my son. Hate is a fire that eats the one who feeds it. What rose in me was a clean, cold recognition. He believed my life could be reduced to signatures. He believed I would hesitate long enough to make his work easy. I would not. That afternoon, I walked to the bank to rent a safe deposit box. I brought only my purse and the envelope, leaving the wooden box at home. The clerk guided me to a small room where the metal drawer slid out with a hush. I placed the envelope inside, whispered the date like a blessing, and locked the drawer. On the way, home, The wind off the river smelled of salt and iron. I paused outside the flower shop's old windows. Another name hung above the door. For a heartbeat, I saw my younger self adjusting bouquets, David laughing as he leveled a shelf. Loss often lives beside memory. Back at the house, the briefcase was gone. A text arrived. Late meeting, back after 10. I typed a simple reply, be safe. Then I laid out what I knew. The note from his case, the envelope from Atlanta, the draft power of attorney with its notary, the translucent guide for my hand. Each piece formed a larger pattern, and the pattern no longer frightened me. It guided me. I breathed in and felt my resolve click into place, finally. I closed my notebook and rested my palm on David's carved roses. Helen had warned me not to wait until the ground disappeared. I was done waiting. The second clue was not a whisper. It was a bell, and I heard it clearly. The copies hidden in the bank's safe deposit box gave me a fragile sense of security, but I knew paper alone could not shield me. Paper could be argued, discredited, dismissed. I needed someone who understood the language Andrew spoke, someone who could see through the legal jargon he wielded like a sword. That was when I thought of Michael Grant. Michael had once been David's apprentice, back in the early days when David worked part-time at the power company and part-time with his uncle's carpentry shop. Michael had come around as a teenager, eager to learn how to measure twice and cut once. He had spent evenings at our kitchen table, eating cornbread and chili, asking David about wood grain and balance. Later, he left Charleston for law school, determined to fight for ordinary people in courtrooms where money often spoke louder than truth. I hadn't seen him in years, but I remembered his eyes, steady, clear, unwilling to bend when it mattered. I found his number in an old church directory. When I called, his secretary answered, promising he would return my message. By evening, the phone rang. Mrs. Montgomery? His voice carried both recognition and concern. Yes, Michael. It's been a long time. It has. How are you? I hesitated, then spoke plainly. I need help, legal help, and I can't trust anyone else. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that carries weight. Then, you should come see me, tomorrow morning, if you can. The next day, I stepped into his office downtown. The walls were lined with law books, but on his desk sat a small carving, an unfinished wooden bird that David had once helped him shape. I touched it without thinking. You kept this. He smiled faintly. It reminds me where I started. What brings you here, Karen? I told him everything. Not all at once, but piece by piece. My voice steady as I laid the story before him. The note in Andrew's briefcase, the whispered phone calls, the Atlanta envelope, the forged drafts of power of attorney. With each detail, his expression darkened, not with judgment, but with focus. He wrote notes, asked precise questions, pressed for dates and times. When I finished, the silence stretched between us. Finally, he leaned forward. You did the right thing by coming to me. What Andrew is planning isn't just betrayal. It's fraud. If he forges your signature or manipulates your consent, it could strip you of everything. But you already have the most powerful tool on your side. What is that? I asked. Documentation and silence. You haven't confronted him, so he doesn't know you're watching. That means we control the timing. Strategy in law is not so different from carpentry. You measure, you mark, and only then do you cut. His words settled into me like a stone finding its place. So what do I do now? We build a case before he acts, gather more evidence, emails, financial transfers, witnesses if possible. I'll prepare a restraining order to file quickly if he moves against you. But until then, you must remain outwardly unchanged. Let him believe you are unaware. It was both terrifying and liberating. To remain still while danger circled required strength I wasn't sure I had. But Michael's calm steadiness reminded me of David, and for the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. He handed me a folder. This is where you'll place everything you find: copies, notes, receipts. Keep the original safe in that deposit box, but bring duplicates to me. When the time comes, we'll have a chain of proof. I held the folder close. Michael, do you ever wonder how it comes to this? How children we love turn into strangers? His gaze softened. Every family carries cracks, Karen. Some widen under pressure. What matters is whether you let those cracks break you or guide the light through. I swallowed hard. I don't want to break. Not again. Then don't, he said simply. You've survived worse. This time, you won't be alone. When I left his office, the air felt different. Lighter, though the burden was not gone. I walked past the courthouse, its marble steps worn, smooth, by years of trials and judgments. I thought about how many mothers and fathers had climbed those stairs seeking justice. I wondered if I would be one of them soon. Back home, I brewed tea and sat with my notebook. For the first time, my words did not feel like confessions whispered into darkness. They felt like evidence, like the early pages of a case file. Helen's warning had shown me the path. Michael's counsel gave me the tools. Together, they formed the beginnings of my silent strategy. That evening, Andrew returned late, smelling of cologne and secrecy. He kissed my cheek lightly, asked if I'd eaten, then disappeared into his room with the briefcase. I answered softly, "Yes, I'm fine." My voice was calm, unshaken. He did not see the folder hidden in my drawer or the strength gathering in my silence. As I washed the cracked teacup and set it to dry, I whispered to myself, "Patience, Karen. Measure mark, then cut." Michael's words echoed in my mind. Measure mark, then cut. I realized that silence alone was not enough. If Andrew believed I was blind, then blindness could be my disguise. Behind it, I would watch, and I would gather. Every detail mattered now. So I began to play a role. At breakfast, I moved slower, as though age had finally caught me. I pretended to forget small things, like where I left my keys, or whether I had watered the plants. Andrew seemed almost relieved to see me falter. He mistook my quiet observation for frailty. That was his mistake. One evening, I lingered in the hallway after hearing the low murmur of his voice behind his closed door. His tone was sharper than usual, brisk, professional. I pressed my ear against the cool wood. "Yes, the accounts are ready," he said. "Cayman is safer. She won't notice until it's finished." My heart pounded, but I stayed still, my breathing shallow. He ended the call quickly when he heard footsteps in the hall. I stepped back, carrying a basket of laundry as camouflage. When he opened the door, I smiled faintly. "Long day?" He nodded, studying me for a trace of suspicion, but I let my shoulders sag and sighed about the laundry. He relaxed, closing the door again. The performance had worked. Later that night, when he finally slept, I crept into his office. The glow of his laptop still faintly lit the desk. I had brought my phone tucked into my apron pocket, camera ready. I slid into his chair and opened the email window left behind. The screen revealed transfers, account numbers, offshore instructions. I lifted the phone and clicked silently, frame after frame, wide shot, close up, even the sender's address stamped with time. My hands were steady, like when I tied ribbons around fragile bouquets years ago. I knew I couldn't copy files without alerting him, but photographs were enough. Each click was a thread in the net I was weaving. I moved to the printer tray and found a stack of receipts, first-class plane tickets to Grand Cayman, dated for the following month. The names printed on the itinerary froze me. Not just Andrew, but also Melissa, the colleague he had spoken to in whispers. The woman whose laughter I had overheard through the phone. For a moment, rage surged hot through me. Betrayal upon betrayal, layered like rot beneath polished wood. My son was not only plotting to erase me, but also building a future with someone who encouraged it. Yet even in the heat of fury, I forced myself still. Anger could ruin everything. Patience would save me. I photographed the receipts, flipping them carefully, then slid them back in place. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, sharp and unfamiliar. I left as silently as I had come, closing the door with the gentlest click. Back in my room, I opened the wooden box carved with roses. The envelope of evidence was growing thicker. The note from his case, the draft contracts, now the photographs and receipts. Each piece felt like a brick in the wall I was building against him. A wall that would stand when the time came to confront the storm. Still, the weight of knowledge pressed heavily. I sat on the bed, the crack in my teacup glinting in the lamplight. I thought of the years I had poured into Andrew's future. Every tuition bill, every night alone while David worked late, every time Sarah was asked to wait because Andrew needed more. And now, the fruit of that labor was a plan to ship me out of my own life. I sipped the tea slowly, steadying my breath. Silence was no longer a void. It was a cloak. With it, I could walk unseen in my own house. I could collect truth without noise. I could prepare. The next morning, Andrew glanced at me as he grabbed his coffee. His eyes searched mine, perhaps for suspicion. But I gave him only a faint smile, as though my mind was far away. He relaxed again, confident I was harmless, if only he had known. That day I visited Michael, sliding the new photographs into the folder he had given me. He studied them, his jaw tight. This is stronger than I hoped. Offshore accounts, travel receipts, a companion involved. He is weaving a net around you, Karen, but he does not realize you are weaving one around him. I nodded, feeling both fear and resolve. I won't rush. I'll keep watching. Michael leaned back. Good, because timing will be everything. When the moment comes, we'll cut clean. Until then, let him think you are fading. As I walked home, I understood the paradox. To protect myself, I had to appear weaker. To win, I had to let him believe I was already lost. The silence, once heavy, now felt like armor. That night, I set the teacup carefully on the counter, tracing the crack with my fingertip. I whispered into the stillness. You will not erase me, Andrew. I see you. And in that whisper, I felt my strength returning. By the time autumn settled over Charleston, the air had grown cooler, but the tension in the house thickened with every passing day. My notebook was full of details. The envelope in the safe deposit box grew heavier with proof, and Michael's counsel steadied me. Yet Andrew still believed he was in control. He moved through the rooms with the quiet arrogance of someone who thought the future already belonged to him. One evening, As the shadows stretched long across the kitchen, he sat across from me at the table. The leather briefcase rested by his chair, as constant a companion as his shadow. He buttered his bread with the precision of a man rehearsing lines. Then, casually, as if he were asking about the weather, he said, "Mom, I've been thinking. You're managing a lot of property and accounts. It must be overwhelming at your age." I stirred honey into my tea, watching the golden swirl catch the light. My face revealed nothing. "It keeps me busy," I answered. He leaned back, studying me. "There's a simpler way. You could sign over authority to me. Power of attorney. I'd handle everything, spare you the stress. You'd never have to worry again." The words struck like a blade, but I did not flinch. Instead, I lifted my cracked porcelain cup, tracing the familiar fissure with my finger before sipping slowly. Silence filled the space between us, louder than any argument I could have made. Andrew frowned. "Mom, did you hear me?" I set the cup down gently, meeting his eyes with calm steadiness. "Yes, I heard you." He waited, expecting debate, persuasion, perhaps even gratitude. But I offered nothing more. My stillness unnerved him. He tapped his fork against the plate, a faint rhythm of impatience. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You don't have to decide now. Just think about it." I nodded once, neither agreeing nor refusing. The silence stretched, pressing against him until he shifted in his chair. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt cross his expression. He could not read me, and that unsettled him more than anger would have. Later that week, the confrontation deepened. I was in the garden, trimming dead leaves from the rose bushes, when Andrew approached. His voice carried that rehearsed calm again. "Mom, these houses, the investments, it's too much for you. I can make it easier. All I need is your trust." I slid the clippers into my pocket, brushing soil from my hands. "Trust is not something you demand, Andrew. It's something you earn." The words were soft, but they landed heavy. His jaw tightened. He tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "I'm your son. If I haven't earned it by now, when will I?" I looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the roses. I didn't answer. My silence was deliberate, measured. He stood there, shifting his weight, waiting for me to argue. When none came, he finally muttered something about needing to get to the office and walked away. In that silence, I felt a shift. For the first time, Andrew had encountered a version of me he did not understand. He had prepared for resistance, for tears, for pleading. He had not prepared for a mother who simply refused to react. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Silence unsettles him more than anger." Continue. It was not easy. Every maternal instinct urged me to cry out, to demand honesty, to beg him to return to the boy I once knew. But I forced myself to remember Michael's counsel. Timing is everything. My silence was not absence. It was presence, sharpened into strategy. One small detail confirmed it. A week later, I noticed Andrew watching me as I folded laundry. He studied my face, searching for signs of knowledge. His eyes narrowed, suspicious. But when I hummed a hymn softly, pretending to lose myself in the rhythm of folding towels, he looked away. My act had worked again. He believed me weaker than I was. But beneath the quiet surface, I was strong. Each unspoken word added another layer of control, another weight to the balance shifting in my favor. When I lay in bed that evening, the crack in my teacup resting on the nightstand beside me, I whispered, "You won't see me coming, Andrew. Not because I am loud, but because I am silent." And in that silence, I found power. I believed I had already seen the worst of Andrew's betrayal. The note in his briefcase, the forged drafts, the whispered calls to Melissa, the tickets to Cayman, all of it cut me deeply. Yet nothing prepared me for the discovery that came next. It was not just money or property he was trying to steal. It was the truth of who he had become. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Andrew had left for work, his briefcase in hand, while I remained at home tending to the garden. After trimming the roses, I carried a basket of clippings inside and placed them by the sink. That was when I noticed the printer light flashing in his office. Curiosity stirred, though I hesitated. Each step into his private world felt like trespassing, but I reminded myself, I was not prying. I was protecting. I pressed the power button and found a document left in the tray. My eyes scanned the header first. A legal contract of guardianship drafted by Andrew's firm. But the names listed shocked me. Not only was my estate mentioned, but so was the name of a child I had never heard before. I froze. The words blurred, then sharpened again. The child was listed as Andrew's dependent. The mother, Melissa Carter. I sank into the chair, the contract shaking in my hands. A child. My son had a child. A secret grandchild I had never been told about. And worse, the document tied my estate into provisions for them both, as if I were already gone, as if my life had ended on paper while I still breathed. The ache that spread through me was unlike the earlier betrayals. Money could be rebuilt. Property could be reclaimed. But a child hidden from me, flesh of my flesh, denied its grandmother. That wound cut into the core of my being. I had carried Andrew in my body, raised him through illness and grief, and now he had created new life in secrecy, weaving it into his deception. I pressed my hand against my chest, whispering, "Why, Andrew? Why this silence?" Tears came unbidden. I thought of the nights I had sung him to sleep, the mornings I walked him to school. I thought of David, who never lived to see his grandchildren, how he would have wept to know that one existed, hidden in the shadows of deceit. I should have felt anger, and part of me did. But what overwhelmed me was sorrow, not only for myself, but for the child who was born into secrecy, whose existence was treated like another ledger line in Andrew's scheme. That child deserved more than whispers and forged contracts. That child deserved truth. I folded the document carefully, sliding it into my notebook. When Andrew returned that evening, I studied him differently. His smile was tight, his eyes distracted. I wondered if Melissa and the child were waiting somewhere, perhaps in another apartment across town. Did he tuck his son or daughter into bed at night? Did he tell Melissa stories about how his mother was frail, fading, soon to be out of the way? At dinner, I tried to steady my voice. "Andrew, do you ever think about family? About what it means?" He glanced up, surprised. "Of course, Mom. Why do you ask?" "Because family isn't paper. It isn't signatures or authority. It's presence. It's truth." For a moment, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. Then he laughed softly, dismissing my words as sentimental. "You've always been too idealistic." I let the silence answer him, but inside, my heart whispered a vow. This was no longer only about protecting my estate. It was about protecting a grandchild who had been erased before they could even know me. That night, I wrote in my notebook until my hand cramped. A child. My blood. Hidden. If I stay silent, the lie becomes truth. But if I speak too soon, everything crumbles. The turmoil returned heavier than before, yet alongside it grew a strange clarity. Andrew's betrayal was deeper than greed. It was fear. Fear of being seen for what he had done. Fear of me discovering not only his plan to erase me, but the life he had built on lies. I realized then that my silence would be more powerful than ever. He did not know I had discovered his secret family. He did not know I carried proof in my notebook. And so I would wait, as I always had. But now, I waited not only for myself, but for the child whose name was buried in legal print. As dawn broke through the window, I held the cracked teacup in my hands, its fracture glowing in the light. I whispered to the empty room, "You are not invisible to me, little one. Even if he hides you, I will remember you." And for the first time, my silence felt like protection not only for myself, but for a future that had been denied me. The discovery of Andrew's secret child did more than wound me. It sharpened my resolve. For weeks, I had lived in a balance between silence and preparation, but I knew now that silence alone would not hold forever. Michael had warned me that timing was everything. And when I placed that guardianship draft into his hands, his jaw clenched with a weight I had not seen before. "This changes the scope," he said firmly. "Your son isn't just preparing to move your estate. He's weaving it into a future he has no right to control. If he forges ahead, you could be stripped of authority overnight. We need to file an emergency petition for a temporary restraining order. It will freeze movement on your estate until a full hearing can be held." The words, "emergency petition," felt foreign in my mouth. But Michael's eyes held no hesitation. I nodded. "What do you need from me?" "Documentation, signatures, a sworn affidavit stating what you've witnessed and what evidence you have. We must move quickly before he executes the power of attorney." The following morning, I dressed in my plainest clothes, the kind I had once worn to the shop, simple slacks and a cardigan. I wanted to appear as I was, not a woman of millions, but a widow who had built her life through years of labor. Michael met me at his office with a folder thick with forms. For 2 hours I wrote. Line after line, I recounted the story. The note in the briefcase, the forged drafts, the receipts, the offshore emails, the guardianship document. My hand cramped, but I pressed forward, pausing only to sip the lukewarm tea Michael's assistant had brought. Every word felt like a stone lifted from my chest. At the end, I signed my name in firm strokes. My signature, my real one, was no longer a weakness to be copied. It was my weapon. Michael looked over the affidavit, then nodded with quiet approval. "This is solid. We'll attach the photographs and copies. The judge will see the pattern clearly. Are you ready?" Ready. The word rolled through me like a test. Was I ready to drag my own son into the light of a courtroom? Was I ready to stand as a mother, not in nurture, but in defense against her child? My heart quaked, but my voice steadied. "Yes, I am ready." Together we walked to the courthouse. The building's stone steps loomed high, carved with decades of footsteps before mine. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time we reached the clerk's window, my pulse beat in my throat. Michael handed over the thick stack of papers. The clerk stamped each one, the sound sharp, final, undeniable. When she slid the receipt back across the counter, I saw the time printed in bold letters, 10:42 a.m. I fixed it in my memory. At that hour, on that day, the tide began to turn. Outside, the autumn air cut crisp against my cheeks. I paused on the courthouse steps, gripping the railing, and let myself breathe. For months, Andrew had moved in shadows, believing me powerless. But now there was a record, a file, a judge who would read my words. I was no longer invisible. Michael placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done the hardest part, Karen. Now the law will hold the line until we reach the hearing. Andrew cannot touch your estate without risking contempt." I swallowed back the swell of relief. Tears pressed, but I held them. "Thank you, Michael. I don't know what would have happened if—" "You acted in time," he said, interrupting gently. "That's what matters." That night, back at the house, I brewed tea as usual. Andrew came in later, his tie loosened, his voice casual. "Long day, Mom?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, just errands." He nodded, distracted, setting down his briefcase. He had no idea that the world beneath him had shifted. He had no idea that a judge's stamp now stood between him and the estate he thought already his. I carried my cup to the sink, watching the cracked porcelain glow under the kitchen light. For the first time in months, the fracture did not feel like a symbol of loss. It felt like proof that something broken could still serve, still endure, still hold steady against the weight of time. As I dried the cup, I whispered to myself, October 17th, 10:42 in the morning, the moment I stopped being erased. And in that whisper, I felt the first edge of peace return. The petition had been filed, the papers stamped, the hour etched into my memory. Yet that evening, when the house grew quiet and the lights dimmed, I realized the hardest part was not the filing. It was the waiting. Silence, once my weapon, now pressed on me like a heavy cloak. The storm was gathering, and I could feel its weight in the stillness. Andrew was not home that night. He had texted that he would be late, meetings running long. I knew better. Somewhere, Melissa was waiting, perhaps holding the child whose name I had read on that guardianship draft. The thought carved a hollow in me, but I forced myself to breathe. There would be a time for every truth to surface. Tonight was not that time. I brewed chamomile tea and carried it to the living room. The wooden box sat on the coffee table, its carved roses glowing softly in the lamp's light. I opened it and laid out the contents. My notebook, the copied drafts, the photographs, the receipts. Evidence of betrayal, yet also evidence of my endurance. One by one, I touched each piece as if reminding myself they were real. Beside the papers, I placed a photo album worn at the corners. Inside were moments too tender for courts or contracts. Andrew's first birthday, icing smeared across his cheeks. Sarah painting daisies on the shop counter. David smiling in his work boots, arms wrapped around us both. I lingered on those images, feeling the ache of what once was. Betrayal has a cruel way of staining memory, but that night I refused to let it. Those joys had been real, and no scheme could erase them. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second like a drumbeat. I slowed myself to match its rhythm. Michael had told me to rest, to prepare. Tomorrow would bring calls, perhaps even confrontation. But tonight was mine, and I would not let fear own it. I poured another cup of tea, tracing the familiar crack down its porcelain side. That cup had survived drops and chips, yet it still held warmth. I realized then it was not just an anchor. It was a mirror. I was cracked, but not broken. Fractured, but still whole enough to carry what mattered. As I sat in the quiet, I allowed myself to speak aloud, not to Andrew, not to Michael, but to David. "You should have been here," I whispered. "You should have seen how tall he grew, how smart, how ambitious. You would have stopped him before it came to this." My voice trembled, but I pressed on. I've carried us this far. Tomorrow, I carry us again. The house creaked. In reply, settling into its frame, I thought of Sarah, wondering if she felt any pull to return, if she sensed the fracture widening in her family. I longed for her presence, but I knew I could not reach out yet. To drag her into this battle before I had secured the ground would be unfair. Still, I prayed silently that one day she would understand. The night deepened. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, rattling the old panes. I dimmed the lamp and let the room fill with shadows. In that darkness, I slowed everything: the rise of my breath, the beat of my heart. It was a discipline, a way of steadying myself before the storm. Silence was no longer just a tactic. It was sanctuary. I closed my eyes and let the weight of years wash over me. The shop's long hours, the laughter of my children, the crushing loneliness of widowhood, the sacrifices made in love. All of it had led here, to this quiet moment before the battle. And though my heart trembled, my spirit did not. I had bent before, but I had never broken. Just before midnight, I returned the documents to the wooden box and slid it under the couch. I washed the cracked teacup, drying it with the old lace handkerchief. Each movement was deliberate, slow, as if I were marking time until the dawn. Standing at the window, I looked out at the garden. The roses were bare now, stripped by the season. Yet I knew that under the soil, roots still held strong, waiting for spring. That thought steadied me. Tomorrow, the world might shift. Andrew might rage. Papers might surface. Lawyers might clash. But tonight, like the roses, I was rooted. Silent, unseen, but alive. I turned off the light and let the darkness embrace me. My last words were a whisper into the quiet. Let the storm come. I am ready. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and paper, a mixture that clung to its marble halls. On the morning of the hearing, I stood at the base of the steps, clutching the folder Michael had prepared. My knees ached from the climb ahead, but I steadied myself. Each step was a declaration. I will not be erased. Michael walked beside me, calm and deliberate. Remember, he said quietly, you don't need to say much. The evidence speaks louder than words. Your silence is strength. When we entered the courtroom, the sight nearly stopped my breath. Andrew sat at the table opposite us, Melissa beside him, her posture sharp and confident. They looked every part the polished attorneys they were, pressed suits, measured smiles, eyes forward as though victory had already been sealed. Andrew's gaze brushed over me, not with warmth, but with calculation. He had expected me to falter, perhaps not even appear. Instead, I lowered myself into the chair at Michael's side, straightened my back, and folded my hands around the cracked lace handkerchief. The judge entered, robes flowing, eyes keen. The clerk read the docket, my name against my son's. The words struck deep. Montgomery. V. Montgomery. A family split wide open, laid bare in public. Andrew rose first, his voice steady, rehearsed. He spoke of concern for me, how my age left me vulnerable, how he sought only to simplify my affairs. He painted himself as the dutiful son, willing to shoulder the burdens of property and accounts for my own good. His words dripped with the polish of years in court, but I heard the hollowness underneath. When it was Michael's turn, he did not raise his voice. Instead, he opened the folder and laid each piece of evidence before the judge. The note from the briefcase, the forged drafts, the offshore transfers, the plane tickets, the guardianship contract with the hidden child's name. One by one, he placed them down, his tone steady, his pace unhurried. "This is not a son acting in protection," Michael said. "This is a pattern of premeditated fraud." Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I saw her fingers tighten around her pen, her lips pressing into a line. Andrew leaned toward her, whispering, but her eyes flickered with something new: fear. The judge studied each document carefully. Silence filled the room, broken only by the shuffle of papers. At last, the judge looked at Andrew. "These are serious allegations. Do you deny this handwriting is yours?" Andrew hesitated. Just a second, but enough. His voice caught before he answered. "Those notes are being misinterpreted. I was planning contingencies." Michael leaned forward. "Contingencies that require forging your mother's signature? Contingencies that include transferring millions offshore without her consent?" The words landed like stones in water, rippling through the room. For the first time, Andrew's practiced confidence cracked. He shifted in his chair, eyes darting toward me, searching for a sign of weakness. I gave him none. I simply held his gaze, calm, silent, unblinking. Then came the moment I did not expect. Melissa stood. Her voice trembled slightly as she addressed the judge. "I need to clarify my role. I was aware of some documents, but I did not authorize or condone forgery. I cannot risk my license for this." Andrew's head snapped toward her, shock flashing in his eyes. Betrayal turned back upon him, swift and merciless. She continued, producing her own copies of emails Andrew had sent, ones that implicated him further. The judge called for order as Andrew's voice rose, protesting, accusing Melissa of lying. But it was too late. The tide had shifted. I sat still, hands folded around the handkerchief. I did not need to speak. The evidence, the silence, even Melissa's reluctant confession, all of it spoke louder than any plea I could have made. Finally, the judge's gavel struck. Until further review, Andrew Montgomery is barred from acting on behalf of his mother's estate. All attempted transfers are frozen. A full investigation will proceed. The sound echoed through me like the toll of a bell. Relief, grief, and sorrow intertwined. My son sat collapsed in his chair, his polished armor stripped away. As the courtroom emptied, Michael placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Karen. You held your ground." I nodded, my eyes on Andrew. He would not meet my gaze now. The silence between us was heavier than words, but in that silence, I was no longer the one trembling. When the gavel struck, I thought the storm had passed. But storms have a way of circling back, finding cracks you never knew existed. The court's decision froze the accounts and barred Andrew from touching my estate. Yet the air around me carried no peace. I walked out of that courthouse with Michael by my side, the sun glaring sharp against the marble steps, neighbors whispering as they passed. For the first time, Andrew avoided my eyes, but I knew him well enough to recognize his silence was not surrender. It was calculation. That evening, the house felt heavy. I moved through each room slowly, touching the banister, the frames, the embroidered cloths folded neatly on shelves. They were reminders of what had been nearly stolen. Yet beneath my relief ran a current of dread. Andrew was cornered, and cornered men lash out. I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table, the lace handkerchief resting beneath my palm. The house hummed in its old rhythm, creaks in the floorboards, the refrigerator's soft thrum. But every sound felt charged. My son's betrayal lingered in the walls, and though the judge had seen truth, I could not shake the feeling that Andrew would not rest. The call came just after 9. It was Melissa. Her voice cracked through the receiver, tight with panic. "Karen, he's unraveling." After court, he stormed into my office, demanding I retract my statement. He swore he'd find another way. He said you'd regret this. Her words cut deeper than I expected. I had always known Andrew was ambitious, but threats? That was new, or perhaps I had been too blind before to see them for what they were. I thanked Melissa quietly, assuring her she had done the right thing, then set the phone down. My hands trembled, but I forced myself still. Fear was what he counted on. Silence was what I had mastered. Michael called minutes later, his tone steady, though I could hear the weight beneath it. I expected him to lash out. "Stay alert. Keep your doors locked. If anything feels off, you call me right away." I promised I would, though I knew the locks on the doors were nothing compared to the lock I had already placed on my heart. My trust in Andrew was gone, and that loss was heavier than any deadbolt. That night, sleep refused me. I walked the halls of the house, the silver necklace cold against my skin. In the mirror, I studied my reflection, the lines etched deep around my eyes, the streaks of silver in my hair. I whispered softly to the woman staring back, "You are not weak. You will not be erased." The next morning, I drove to the embroidery shop. Work had always steadied me, each stitch a thread holding my spirit together. Customers came and went, some offering quiet nods of support. One elderly woman pressed my hand gently, her eyes filled with recognition. She didn't need to speak. The look was enough to tell me she understood what it meant to be betrayed by your own blood. In the afternoon, Lily arrived. For weeks, she had kept her distance, torn between her brother and me. But now she walked into the shop, her face pale but resolute. "Mom," she said softly, "I heard everything. The court, the lies. I'm sorry it took me so long to see. I want to stand with you." Her words unraveled the knot I had carried for years. I reached for her hand, holding it tight. "You don't need to apologize, Lily. You're here now. That's enough." Together, we closed the shop that evening, the streets of Charleston alive with the hum of summer. Back at the house, she lingered in the kitchen as I made tea. We sat together, a quiet companionship filling the spaces betrayal had hollowed out. Then came the knock at the door. Sharp, insistent. My body stiffened. Lily's eyes widened. I moved slowly, the handkerchief clenched in my fist as I opened the door. Andrew stood there. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his briefcase dangling from one hand. For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, standing on this same porch after a scraped knee, waiting for me to patch him up. But the man before me was colder, sharper. "Mom," he said, voice low, strained. "We need to talk." Lily rose behind me, her voice firm. "You've done enough talking, Andrew." But I lifted a hand to stop her. I looked into his eyes, steady, unflinching. "If you've come to threaten me, save your breath. The court has already heard the truth." His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You think this is over. It isn't. You humiliated me. You turned my own sister against me. I will find a way back." I did not answer. I let the silence settle between us, heavy and unyielding. He waited, searching for weakness, but found none. Finally, I closed the door slowly, firmly, the latch clicking into place. My hands did not shake. The silence was my answer, and it carried more weight than any argument. As I turned back to Lily, I saw the fear in her eyes, but also the respect. "How did you do that?" she whispered. "Because," I said quietly, touching the necklace at my throat, "sometimes silence is louder than shouting." And in that moment, I felt the tide fully turn. The sound of the gavel still rang in my ears when the courtroom emptied, leaving behind only the echoes of restless feet and hushed voices. I stayed seated longer than most, gathering my strength. When I finally rose, my knees felt heavier than they should, but my spirit stood taller than ever. The judge's ruling had confirmed what I already knew. Truth, though, bruised and battered, could not be erased. Yet I also knew the war inside my family was not finished. As I stepped into the hallway, the air shifted. The courthouse corridors always smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a mixture of dignity and decay. Lawyers brushed past, their arms full of files, their voices clipped and efficient. Ordinary people sat nervously on benches, waiting their turn to face judgment. And then there was Andrew, standing against the far wall, his briefcase at his feet, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I froze for a moment, letting myself absorb the image. My son, once a boy who used to run through these halls on field trips, was now a man undone by his own ambition. He looked smaller than I remembered, though his posture strained to project power. When his eyes finally lifted to meet mine, I saw something raw, almost feral. "Mom?" he said, his voice rough. "Please." One word, one plea, yet it struck me harder than any accusation he had ever thrown. I moved closer, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step deliberate. Lily lingered behind me, her presence quiet but steady, like a witness I had not asked for, but desperately needed. Andrew's voice cracked as he tried again. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could control it. The estate, the accounts, all of it. I just wanted a chance to prove myself, to show I wasn't useless." The words pulled at me, threads unraveling old memories. The nights I sat with him over homework, coaxing patience into his stubborn mind. The mornings I packed lunches, slipping in little notes of encouragement. The years after his father died, when Andrew swore he would take care of me one day. Now, here we stood, and his idea of care had turned into erasure. "You wanted to erase me," I said quietly, my voice steady though my chest ached. "You wanted my life's work, my memories, everything your father and I built, to become nothing more than your stepping stone." His eyes filled, glistening in the courthouse light. "I thought you'd never let go, Mom. You hold on to everything. The shop, the house, the traditions. I thought you'd cling until the day you died, and then there would be nothing left for me but scraps. I was wrong. I see that now. Please, forgive me." The word forgive hung between us, fragile and heavy. Forgiveness had never been cheap in my eyes. It was not something to toss like coins in a fountain. It required truth, repentance, and time, none of which Andrew had yet proven. I took a breath and looked around the hallway. People were pretending not to stare, but I could feel their eyes pressing against us. To them, I was a mother confronting a broken son. To me, I was a woman deciding whether to let her wounds fester or scar into strength. Lily stepped closer, her hand brushing against my sleeve. "You don't owe him your forgiveness, Mom," she whispered. "Not now. Not like this." I turned back to Andrew. His shoulders sagged. His briefcase tipped over, papers spilling onto the floor like remnants of his broken plan. He fell to his knees, gathering them clumsily, his tears dripping onto the marble tiles. The sound of his sobs filled the hallway, raw and unshielded. For a moment, I almost reached out. The instinct of a mother never dies, no matter the betrayal. But I stopped myself. Some lessons are only learned when the hand you expect does not appear. "Andrew," I said softly, my voice carrying more power in its calm than any shout could. "I cannot forgive you today. Forgiveness is not words spoken in desperation. It is a change of life, a proof of heart. Until you face yourself, you cannot face me." His sobs grew quieter, his hands still clutching scattered papers. He did not look up. I turned then, Lily steady at my side, and walked toward the courthouse doors. Each step felt like another stitch closing a wound. The murmurs followed us, whispers of judgment and sympathy. But I did not need their voices. I carried my own now, strong and unshaken. As we reached the door, I touched the silver necklace at my throat, its weight grounding me. My husband's memory seemed to walk with me, whispering through the years. Money is only a tool. Love is the true inheritance. Outside, the Charleston air was heavy with humidity, the city alive with its usual rhythm. Yet I felt lighter than I had in months. Behind me, in the courthouse hallway, my son trembled. Ahead of me, the world stretched open, waiting for a woman who had chosen silence, dignity, and truth over fear. When Lily slipped her arm through mine outside the courthouse, it felt as though a piece of me long lost had returned. The sky above Charleston carried the weight of summer clouds, thick and gray, yet inside me something lighter stirred. After years of distance, suspicion, and silence, my daughter was standing beside me, no longer a stranger, but a daughter once more. We walked slowly down the courthouse steps. People lingered at the bottom, whispering about the trial, about Andrew's collapse, about me. Their words no longer pierced me the way they once would have. Lily's presence was louder than the gossip, louder than the shame I had feared. When we reached the car, she turned to me, her eyes wet but steady. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm sorry it took me so long. I thought you chose him over me. I thought you trusted Andrew more than you ever trusted me." Her words twisted in my chest because they carried the echo of truth. I had trusted Andrew once. I had leaned on him when his father died, believing his strength would protect us both. In trying to shield Lily from responsibility, I had pushed her away instead. She mistook my caution for doubt, and doubt had turned into distance. I reached for her hand and held it tight. "I never stopped loving you, Lily. I only wanted to protect you from the weight of this estate, from the burden that nearly crushed me. But in doing so, I built walls I never meant to. I see that now." We drove home together, the city's streets familiar yet changed in her company. At the house, she hesitated at the doorway, her eyes sweeping over the furniture, the pictures on the wall, the embroidery framed above the mantel. She had not been here in months, maybe longer. I watched her take it all in as if rediscovering the life she had once belonged to. In the kitchen, I brewed tea the way I always did, setting 2 cups on the table. Lily sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap like a girl waiting for permission to speak. Finally, she broke the silence. "I heard what Andrew said in the hallway," she whispered. "His apologies, his excuses. For so long I believed him. He told me you were holding us back, that you couldn't let go, that I'd never have a place here. And I believed him because I wanted to. I wanted to believe my brother saw me, that he valued me. But it was a lie, wasn't it? I nodded, the steam from my tea curling into the air. He valued what he could take, not what he could give. But you, Lily, you were never invisible to me. You were always the gentler spirit, the one who painted light where others only saw shadows. I feared this estate would dim that light. I didn't know my silence was dimming it more than any inheritance ever could. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled faintly. Then let me help you now, Mom. Let me stand with you. Not because of the money, not because of the estate, but because I want to. Because I'm your daughter, and I don't want to lose another day to distance. Her words healed something I had carried for far too long. For months, maybe years, I had braced myself against betrayal, clinging to silence as armor. But now her voice was stitching together what had been torn apart. That evening, we walked through the embroidery shop together. I unlocked the old cabinet with my mother's key, showing her the ledgers, the records, the generations of hands that had carried this legacy forward. Lily touched the spines gently, reverently, her fingers tracing the faded ink. Every stitch tells a story, I told her, repeating words my own mother had once spoken to me. And every story matters, even when people try to erase it. Lily looked at me, her expression soft but fierce. Then let me stitch with you, Mom. Let me be part of this story again. We spent hours in that shop, her sketching designs, me threading needles, the sound of scissors, the hum of fabric beneath my fingers, the scratch of her pencil on paper. It was a music I had forgotten, a harmony of past and present. Later, back at the house, we sat in the garden as twilight fell. The magnolia trees swayed gently, their blossoms heavy with fragrance. Lily leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder like she used to as a child. Do you think Andrew will ever change? She asked quietly. I considered the question carefully. Change is possible, but it requires truth. And Andrew has not yet chosen truth. Until he does, we must guard ourselves, and we must guard this legacy. But I still pray for him, Lily, because no matter what he's done, he's still my son. That's a truth I can't erase. She slipped her hand into mine, squeezing gently. And I'm your daughter. Don't forget that again. The stars emerged one by one, glittering above us. For the first time in months, I felt a peace that was more than just survival. It was connection, healing, the kind that comes not from winning a battle, but from reclaiming what was almost lost. That night, as I lay in bed, I placed the silver necklace on my nightstand, letting it gleam in the lamplight. It had carried me through storms, reminded me of my husband's faith, and anchored me in silence. But now it was more than a memory. It was a bridge, binding me to the daughter who had returned. I whispered into the quiet, half to myself, half to the memory of the man who once clasped the necklace around my neck. She's home. She's with me. We are not broken. The house settled into silence, but this time, it was not heavy. It was gentle, like a quilt laid over tired shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt whole. In the weeks after Lily returned, the house seemed to breathe again. Where silence had once been a shield, it now became a comfort, a rhythm filled with companionship rather than isolation. The clink of cups in the kitchen, the rustle of fabric in the shop, the murmur of her voice as she shared her designs. It all rebuilt something inside me I had thought forever broken. Every morning, we walked through the garden together. The roses, stripped bare by autumn, stood like skeletons. Yet Lily reminded me they would bloom again in spring. She spoke with a certainty I envied, a faith I had long since buried. Listening to her, I realized that trust, too, was like those roses. It might appear dead, but its roots waited for the right season to flourish again. One evening, as we closed the shop, Lily looked at me with a kind of quiet urgency. "Mom," she said, "you don't have to carry this all alone anymore. You've been guarding everything, the estate, the shop, even Andrew's shadow, for so long. Let me carry some of it too." Her offer struck deeper than she realized. For years, I had convinced myself that protecting meant holding on tightly, keeping every decision in my own hands. But in truth, my grip had been fueled by fear. Fear that letting go meant losing control. Fear that trust would betray me again. Yet, as Lily's eyes held mine, I saw that trust was not about control. It was about faith. That night, I opened the wooden box in front of her. Inside lay the documents, the photographs, the copies of Andrew's forged drafts. Lily's breath caught as she sifted through them, the weight of betrayal pressing against her. But she did not flinch. She placed her hand on mine and said softly, "You've carried this long enough. Now we carry it together." For the first time, I allowed myself to release the burden. The box was still mine, but the weight was shared. And in that sharing, my trust began to mend. Not long after, Michael visited the shop. He carried updates about the case, how the investigation was moving, how Andrew's reputation within his firm was crumbling. Yet what struck me most was the look on his face when he saw Lily beside me, sketching embroidery patterns at the counter. He smiled, almost relieved. "You've got your anchor back," he said quietly to me later. I nodded, glancing toward her. "Yes, and she's stronger than I remembered." Trust was not only returning between mother and daughter, it was being born anew in myself. For so long, I had questioned my instincts, doubted my worth, second-guessed every choice. But each day Lily showed up, steady, unshaken. I realized that my intuition had not been wrong all along. It had simply been waiting for proof, for a reminder that love can return even after betrayal. There was a moment, one quiet afternoon, when I felt the full force of that truth. Lily was bent over a piece of fabric, stitching a magnolia bloom, her brow furrowed in concentration. I sat nearby, the cracked teacup warm in my hands. Watching her, I suddenly saw not only the daughter who had come back, but the future she represented. She was the next keeper of this legacy, the next voice in a story I had nearly lost. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not bitter. They were healing. For the first time in months, my tears carried hope instead of grief. That evening, I wrote in my notebook again. My handwriting was steadier now, the words firmer. Trust can die, but it can also rise. And when it rises, it is stronger, because it knows what it has survived. I placed the notebook back in the wooden box, closed the lid, and felt no fear. The documents inside still mattered, but they no longer defined me. What defined me now was the daughter sitting across the table, her needle flashing in the lamplight, stitching beauty back into the fabric of our lives. As night fell, we carried our teacups into the garden. The magnolias whispered in the breeze, and for the first time, I did not look for danger in the shadows. Instead, I looked at the stars, bright and steady, and believed again in the possibility of tomorrow. "Mom," Lily said quietly, "do you believe we'll get through this?" I looked at her, my hand covering hers, and answered with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. "Yes, because we already are." News moves fast in our town. Consequences move faster when the truth is on paper. Andrew's firm placed him on leave, pending investigation. The state bar opened a disciplinary review after receiving the forged drafts and offshore emails. A request for my statement arrived. I read it twice, steadied my breath, and agreed to cooperate fully. Silence had carried me this far. Now the record would carry the weight I could not speak. Melissa resigned from the firm. She sent a short note, not asking for forgiveness, only admitting her part. She wrote that she had given birth to a boy named Jacob, and that fear had made her small. Fear of losing her license, fear of Andrew's temper, fear the house of cards would collapse. I read her words at the kitchen table, the cracked teacup warm in my hand, and whispered a blessing over a child I had not met. Michael advised filing a civil action to protect the estate and recover costs. I asked for time, then answered on the third day. File to protect, not to punish. Let the law set boundaries. I will set the rest. He nodded. The investigation moved like southern weather, sluggish and then sudden. Subpoenas were issued. Bank records surfaced. The guardianship draft tied Andrew's intent to my assets in ways his words could not unwind. He reached out again and again, switching from rage to pleading to nostalgia. I answered none of it. Silence, again, was my line in the sand. Lily stood beside me through all of it. We turned the shop into a small studio 2 afternoons each week, inviting neighborhood children to learn stitches. Their laughter filled rooms that had once held only worry. Each time a needle tugged thread through fabric, I felt something mend in me. Healing is its own currency. When the state bar issued its interim decision, I read it by the window where the magnolias swayed. Andrew's law license was suspended pending a final hearing. I breathed. That evening, Andrew came to the house unannounced. Lily was there, and Michael had stopped by to drop papers. Andrew stood on the porch, thinner than I remembered, a man who had not slept. He asked to come inside. I kept the threshold between us. He said he was losing everything and begged for help. I kept my voice even. Consequences are not hurricanes. They are mirrors. He flinched and promised repayment. This was never about repayment, I said. It was about truth. He asked what I wanted. 3 things. A written admission to the bar and the court that he prepared to act without my consent. Full cooperation with the audit and any inquiry. A letter to Jacob's mother committing to court, ordered child support, signed and filed. When those are done, we can speak about trust. He swallowed hard. For a moment, I saw the boy who once asked if roses felt pain. He asked if I would forgive him then. Forgiveness is not a receipt, I said. It is a road. You start by walking. He left without shouting. The porch light carved his figure into the dark, and the street took him. Weeks later, Michael confirmed that Andrew had signed the admissions and consented to the audit. The bar scheduled a final hearing. His firm released him quietly. He moved to a small apartment across town. I had traded the town's noise for my own peace. I made one more change. With Michael's help, I amended my estate plan. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. I created an education trust for Jacob. I named Lily as co-trustee of the remainder. I left a pathway for Andrew, contingent on 5 years of documented honest work, counseling, and restitution. It was not punishment. It was a map with milestones. On the day I signed the papers, I wore the silver necklace David once clasped at my throat. The pen felt steady in my hand. As the notary stamped the page, I felt a quiet settling in my bones. My life had been threatened by ink. Now it was safeguarded by it. That night, I placed the documents in the wooden box and turned the key. Outside, the magnolias stirred the air. I lifted the cracked teacup and toasted the empty room. Measure, mark, and cut, I whispered. Then plant. Spring would test us, but our roots held. I chose patience over fury, boundaries over blame. The house listened, and for once, it did not groan at all. In that small ritual, Andrew's consequences found their meaning, not as my victory, but as the space where a different future could begin. The storm did not end with a gavel or a signature. It ended in quiet days, in the slow return of routine, in the soft unfolding of mornings that no longer carried dread. That was how I knew healing had begun, not in triumph, but in the ordinary rhythm of life restored. Each day, Lily and I opened the shop. We stitched magnolia blooms and initials into cloth. Children came in after school, their laughter spilling across the counter as they clumsily learned to guide needles through fabric. They left with uneven rows of thread, but also with pride. I watched them, remembering Andrew as a boy, how he once tugged at fabric too tightly, and how I had guided his small fingers to loosen, to trust the thread. Now, in my quiet heart, I understood that my legacy was not in numbers or deeds. It was in teaching others to trust their hands, their patience, their own worth. That realization brought peace greater than any legal victory. The estate remained protected, the trust for Jacob established. I never met him face to face, but I whispered his name sometimes in the garden, offering blessings to the air as if it could find him. One day, perhaps, he will come looking for the woman his father tried to erase. And when he does, I will not meet him with bitterness. I will meet him with a story. Andrew's shadow still lingered. News reached me that he worked odd jobs, quieter now, humbled by consequence. I carried no triumph in hearing it, only a gentle sorrow. Some wounds take years to heal, and some lessons only arrive when the noise of ambition falls silent. My door was not locked against him, but it was no longer open without condition. He would have to knock, and he would have to wait. In the evenings, Lily and I returned to the garden. The roses, once bare, began to bud with the promise of spring. I found myself kneeling in the soil, hands deep in earth, planting bulbs I had saved for years but never trusted to bloom. As I pressed them into the ground, I realized I was planting more than flowers. I was planting faith in the future, in myself, in the quiet persistence of life. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Lily brought out the photo album. We turned its pages slowly, pointing to the faces of those who had gone before us. My husband's smile, my children's younger days, even the tired lines of my own mother's hands holding embroidery frames. Generations who had given, who had built, who had endured. "Mom," Lily said softly, "do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" I closed the book, resting my hand on its worn cover. I used to dream of a family untouched by betrayal, of a son who never lost his way, of a daughter who never doubted her place. But wishing for what never was keeps you from living what is. I don't wish anymore. I choose. She smiled then, tears bright in her eyes. "And what do you choose?" "I choose to stay, to keep building, to forgive slowly when the time is right, to open doors when they are truly knocked upon, and to believe that even broken things can be made whole again." That night, I returned the cracked teacup to its place on the shelf. I no longer needed to carry it from room to room as my anchor. It had served its purpose. Its fracture still showed, but that was its beauty. The reminder that survival leaves marks, but those marks do not diminish worth. Before bed, I stood at the window, looking out at the magnolias swaying in the moonlight. I touched the silver necklace at my throat, the gift from a husband who had believed in me long before I believed in myself. His voice echoed in memory. Love is the true inheritance. I whispered into the quiet. You were right, and I kept it safe. The house, once heavy with shadows, now felt lighter. It no longer echoed with dread. It hummed with laughter, with Lily's voice, with the small joys of daily life. My story was not one of destruction, but of resilience. Not of endings, but of returns. When I finally closed my eyes that night, I did not dream of courtrooms or betrayals. I dreamed of soil warming beneath the sun, of roses blooming, of hands guiding thread into patterns that told our story. A story of silence that became strength, of loss that gave birth to healing, of a woman once nearly erased who chose instead to live fully, quietly, and true. And that was enough. When I look back on everything, on the note in Andrew's briefcase, on the forged drafts, on the nights I sat alone gripping a cracked teacup, I realize my story was never about millions of dollars or legal victories. It was about something quieter, harder, and far more valuable. It was about remembering who I was when others tried to erase me, and choosing to live from that place of truth. There was a time I believed silence meant weakness, that if I did not shout, I would vanish. But silence, when chosen, became my strongest ally. It was silence that allowed me to see clearly, to gather proof, to let the law, not my anger, speak. It was silence that taught me the power of stepping back instead of striking, of holding steady instead of breaking. And yet, this silence was never empty. It carried memory, pain, endurance, and hope. It carried the echo of my husband's words, the weight of Lily's hand in mine, the unseen blessing whispered toward a grandson I had not yet met. Silence carried me across the storm until I could stand again. I share this because I know I am not the only one. There are many who sit in houses heavy with shadows, wondering if their worth has expired, if their sacrifices have been forgotten, if betrayal has the final word. If you are listening now and feel that weight, I want you to hear me. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. What you built with your hands and your love cannot be erased by greed or lies. Life will test you, sometimes through strangers, sometimes through those closest to you. But the test does not define you. Your response does. For me, that response was not vengeance. It was dignity. It was trusting the law, trusting myself, and finally, trusting those who chose to return, like Lily. The estate remains safe, yes. The shop still stands, the roses will bloom again, and the magnolias still sway in Charleston's breeze. But what matters most is not the preservation of assets. What matters is the preservation of faith, the faith that even in betrayal, family can heal, that even in silence, justice can rise, that even in loss, beginnings wait. I will not tell you my life is perfect now. Andrew's choices still haunt me, and Jacob's face is still unknown to me. Healing is never neat, but it is possible. Every day that I brew tea, that I stitch cloth, that I laugh with Lily, is proof that scars do not end the story. They mark the chapters where survival turned into strength. So I ask you now, what about you? Have you ever faced betrayal that left you questioning your worth? Have you ever stayed silent, not because you were weak, but because you were waiting for the right moment to act? If you have, I want to hear your story. Share it, because someone else may be listening in the shadows, needing proof that they are not alone. Do you think I was right to set conditions for Andrew? To require his repentance before opening the door again? Or do you believe I should have embraced him instantly, no matter the depth of his betrayal? Tell me what you would have done, because questions like these are not solved in silence. They are healed in community. And if you have been erased, overlooked, or betrayed, I want you to remember, your story is not over. You can begin again, no matter your age, no matter your wounds. You can plant roots, protect what is yours, and trust that spring will come. It always does. As for me, I will keep living quietly, steadily. I will guard this home, this shop, and this legacy. I will love the daughter who returned and keep faith for the son who still wanders. I will wait for Jacob, whether tomorrow or years from now, and I will keep stitching beauty into fabric, thread by thread, as a reminder that even broken pieces can be woven into something whole. This is my story, not of erasure, but of endurance, not of vengeance, but of renewal, not of endings, but of a woman choosing every day to stand in truth. Now I hand the story to you. Tell me, what thread are you stitching back into your life?